Well, it's 3 minutes after the hour, and I think we may as well pay respects to the folks who were especially prompt, and we can set out here. Before we get started, I want to welcome in an important guest and partner to the Hurricane Island Outward Bound School, or HIOBS, as we often refer to ourselves. Judiann Smith has been working closely with HIOBS for 18 years as a partner, and I believe has been a participant in a program previously. She is currently the executive director at the Daniel Hanley Center for Health Leadership, based here in Maine. And she's got a really unique vantage point, I think, on the challenges that face healthcare organizations of all sizes and shapes. And Judiann, thanks so much for being here this morning and sharing a few thoughts before we launch into the panel conversation.
Thanks, Andrew. Appreciate it. Hello, everybody. So happy to be here this morning. As Andrew said, I'm the executive director of the Dan Hanley Center for Health Leadership, and we are a 501c3 nonprofit, and what we've been doing for 20 years is developing and delivering leadership development courses and strategic planning and team building for healthcare professionals. And so we come at this with a lot of experience with Outward Bound. As Andrew said, for 18 years, the Hanley Center has been running its Health Leadership Development course, which is an 8-month experiential in-person course that runs here in Maine. We've got well over 500 alumni around the state who are in all sorts of different levels of leadership across health systems and the state of Maine's CDC and DHHS. And it's been a really phenomenal course because of the Outward Bound component. Now, we run a lot of different courses. I can tell you a couple of minutes about them later, but the Health Leadership Development course is really cool because it's an interprofessional course. So whether you're a physician, a nurse, a community health worker, a program manager working on policy, an architect, a lawyer, or an accountant or IT person in healthcare, you are in this course to learn about how to be a leader. And there's never been a time, and I think I used to say this before the pandemic, but now I think when I say it, it's so true. There's never been a time where leadership has been more challenging than it is right now. The pandemic just really took a lot away from our workforce. So many people left healthcare, and there's been such financial challenges and strain that the folks that are left are just working harder and doing more. And there's a real challenge of them burning out and just not being able to find their way and remember their why of why they got into leadership in the first place. So a course that includes an Outward Bound component really helps with that. It supports them in thinking about the challenges before them, the challenges that they've already overcome, the accomplishments that they've had, and how they want to show up as a leader in the future. When they are presented with a challenge in Outward Bound, they're part of a team, and they have to think about, how am I going to approach this? What is my role among this team to solve this challenge that Outward Bound has put before me? And year after year, the Outward Bound component is always a highlight. When we do our evaluations every year, they talk about that being their favorite session. Of course it is. We're not didactically, training them through the Outward Bound session, and they're out there in the woods in Newry, Maine, or some other part of, the outdoors, whether it's Maine or somewhere else in the country. They're out there and they're learning about themselves more than anything. And it's a really deep learning experience. So I'm really happy to promote it and to talk about it here this morning. The Hanley Center, our other courses do not use an Outward Bound component yet. And I'll put yet in there because I would love to add more in. But many of our other courses where we train people more didactically specifically for nurses, courses specifically for advanced practice providers, courses specifically for physicians. We do a lot of that as well. But this course, HLD, we've been running it, like Andrew said, for 18 years. And I know he's going to talk about VUCA, which is, this term that talks about just volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. These are the 4 components of what everyone is dealing with in healthcare every day. And not that they didn't before the pandemic, but I think it's just so much more challenging now than it was before the pandemic. And so when we train, we often talk about the VUCA environment and how you're going to show up as a leader and how to be the best that you can be. And the HIOBS experience really supports that very much. So I don't have a lot more I wanted to add. I'm just really excited to hear what these leaders are going to talk about in healthcare. And the Hanley Center is here for you. If anyone in healthcare is interested in talking to me more, please get in touch with me through our website. But, all of you out there, all of you doing this crazy hard work, thank you so much for what you're doing, for caring for patients, for caring for our families. We all have a healthcare story. I know each of you do, and I'm just so grateful for the work that you do every day, no matter your role.
Judiann, thank you so much. That's a wonderful introduction, and we're really privileged to get to work with your HLD program. So much appreciated. Well, Judiann, you provided a nice setup there, referencing the VUCA acronym, and some of you may be familiar with it, standing for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And it's become sort of a catch acronym or catchphrase that describes our modern workplace, that it's no longer the case that people are doing rote, mechanized assembly line style work. We live in environments that are changing extremely rapidly, requiring new skill sets and new knowledge. And, as we've learned painfully over the last several years, anything can change. Our whole lives can change overnight. So it was thinking about that topic of volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, and its relationship to the work at Outward Bound that sparked the formation of this panel and today's conversation. And I just wanted to say a word about the title of the presentation, because as the days were coming closer to this presentation or this panel discussion, I got to realizing that the title we chose is probably a bit ambiguous in itself. If you've been around Outward Bound, the phrase "train through challenge, not for it" is important, and it resonates. It's something that the founder of Outward Bound advocated for 80 plus years ago. This was an educator who said the chief aim of education is to impel people towards value-forming experiences to ensure the survival of these 5 characteristics: an enterprising curiosity, tenacity in pursuit, an indefatigable spirit, which for those of us from the United States means undefeatable, readiness for sensible self-denial, and above all, compassion. I think the work and what Kurt Hahn, that founder, thought was that rather than sitting by in a classroom, reading about how people lead or reading about how teams can support one another, we should get out and do it. Let's be challenged to grow those muscles and to develop those attributes. So with that as a setup, I'd love to introduce our panelists and better still give them an opportunity to introduce themselves. So I'm going to begin with Jaime Nicole Audet. Jaime works for Northern Light Health here in Maine, and she's vice president responsible for human resources, operations, and rewards. Jaime does have a little firsthand experience with our Outward Bound programming. And she brings just a unique perspective in that she's got a very people-focused perspective on her organization. So, Jaime, you want to provide, hopefully I didn't just step all over your own introduction, but tell us a little bit more about what that job entails and who you are, and maybe you could even share an instance when some form of challenge really helped in your own growth.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. Good morning, everybody. Thanks so much for having me here today. I'm excited to share my experience from a human resources perspective. As Andrew said, I'm Jaime Audet. I always put the Nicole in the middle of all of my signatures because I found over the years I would show up at meetings and people would be surprised that I was a woman because they associated the name Jaime with a man. So I always put the Nicole in the middle so people wouldn't have that. Oh, wait, it was just always a weird thing when I was younger. So I've added that for years now. And I oversee HR operations and rewards, which is it's a hard thing to describe, except for that I oversee all the back office components of your employment experience. So if my team is doing a fantastic job, you don't really even notice us in the background, and you're happy with your overall employment experience. With the exception of a couple of fantastic years in Boston, which gave me my pure love of the New England Patriots. I am a lifelong Mainer. I have both of my degrees from the University of Maine, and I am very proud to graduate from the University of Maine. I am from rural Maine, from a town with no stoplights. I am super passionate about rural healthcare and access to care for all people of Maine, not just those that are physically close to it. So that's a little bit of background about me. And I want to share what I would call my aha moment as a leader. So by quick way of background, I started in this role in July of 2019. About a month later, we started on a very large 24-month project on top of all of our regular work. And then in March of 2020, we know what happened, and that was when COVID hit healthcare and all of us all across the world. So as part of my job, I manage the health plan for our Northern Light employees. And, as part of our culture of caring, we wanted to look at our data and see what were the instances of utilization of behavioral health services? What could we do to better support our employees and their families? And so I started looking at utilization patterns, and I had one of the most honestly profound moments of my life. And hopefully I can tell you about this without getting all in my feels here today. But I was looking at the utilization patterns, and 6 months after the pandemic hit, we saw an enormous spike in behavioral health services for pediatrics, so 18 and under. Exactly 12 months after that spike, you could lay this spike on top of the first spike. We saw the same curve happen with our adults. I looked at that information, and what I saw was, oh my word, all these people, I'm a mom, right? So all these people held it together or didn't seek service or didn't get any help. They held strong for their community or their children or their job or whatever, and then they hit their breaking point 12 months later. All this time, my very high performing team, we live in operations, right? So we had to keep the lights on, continue our big project. We had to implement new benefits to help protect our employees. We had to build data trackers. We had to do new reporting, all these things related to COVID. And it was all at a breakneck pace and with no time for the perfection that my team strives for. So this last 20 months, right, and before I saw this chart, I've been, cheering my team on, telling them how valuable they were and they're doing awesome, reminding them that they're making a difference. They were enthusiastic and proud. I was always cautious about, were they taking time off or how long are they working in their hours? But I never asked them, are you okay? And when I saw that chart, I thought, geez, Jaime, you thought you were doing it all right, but you missed this piece. And the reason you missed it was because it felt too personal. It didn't feel like a boss. It felt too much like a friend. And I pulled my team together not too long after that, and I cried in front of them. And it's a very vulnerable moment for me to talk about, but it changed the whole dynamic of our team that day. For me to say that I was sorry, that this was important to me, but I didn't talk to them about it, and that other people had a lot of feelings too. At that point, we went from a high-performing team to a high-performing family. And so that moment for me was that it is okay to be human. It is okay to interact with your teammates and your coworkers and your direct reports like family, because they are. You spend all your time with them. So that was what I wanted to share as my leadership aha moment, and I look forward to adding more to the conversation as we go through today. Thank you.
Jaime, that's an amazing story, and it's vulnerable just in this moment for you to share that. So thank you so much for bringing that authenticity to us today. So I'm going to welcome in also Omar Hasan. Omar is the Chief Quality Officer at MaineHealth, and he is the clinician on our panel. I'll allow him to give a bit about his background and his role. And Omar, you've got a tough act to follow here in Jaime's story, but I'd love it if there's some salient moment in your life or career when challenge led to your growth. We'd love to hear about it.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today for this conversation. And I will say that is a tough act to follow. That was an inspiring story. Really resonated with me. And By way of introduction, I'm the Chief Quality Officer at MaineHealth. I've been in the role approximately 8 years. It's a pleasure to work for MaineHealth. It's an outstanding workplace. It's a terrific organization. I'm excited about coming to work here every day because of all the respect and gratitude I have for my colleagues, our care team members who really worked hard through the pandemic and continue to work hard in meeting the needs of our communities. I will say that the COVID-19 pandemic has been a transformative experience for me from a personal and professional growth standpoint. And I will speak about that as well. But I wanted to mention some experiences that I had before joining MaineHealth while I was working for the American Medical Association. And I think it was a terrific opportunity for me to visit many different places in our great nation. I traveled more than half the states in the United States. I had an opportunity to work with some of the public health agencies and large health systems, as well as work with many of the physicians in small practices with their small teams providing care in rural areas away from the big cities. And I think I came away inspired. I came away inspired with the ingenuity that people put into solving their everyday challenges in making healthcare accessible, providing high quality and safe care to patients wherever they may be. And one of the key lessons that I learned from traveling all over the country was that the sense of community, people coming together to solve both the public health and the healthcare challenges, there is no limit to that sense of collaboration, that spirit of collaboration. I was in states that had a really well-developed public health infrastructure that had, they were wealthy states, so they had the resources to meet the needs of their communities. But really what surprised me is that even in the states that did not have as many resources, that did not have such a well-developed communities. And that left me with the idea that it really, you don't need to look for help when solving these challenges. It is possible for healthcare providers, care team members, health systems, whatever they may be, to figure out solutions to the challenges they're facing in their state, in their community. And it is possible to make a difference. So I went in thinking I will find a lot of disparity in the level of care, in the level of health and well-being. I came out from that 4+ years experience at the AMA, just being amazed at how people came together to solve issues, and that the disparities were far less than I had imagined going into that situation. But I'll say a few words about the COVID-19 pandemic, because I think it is, for someone like me who has been in healthcare a couple of decades now, maybe at the midpoint of my career, one of the most significant events that has happened. And I think it's significant in two ways. The onslaught of the pandemic itself that really came near the point of overwhelming healthcare providers. I don't think they were quite overwhelmed even at the worst of times because of all the support we received from the community and from the government as well. But also the way in which the pandemic accelerated transformation that was already happening in healthcare, but perhaps was happening at a much slower pace. But now we have seen traditional care models being challenged, a much more use of digital access to healthcare resources and services than ever before. So I think it acted as an accelerant, just speeding up the change that took place. But throughout all this, I have been inspired by the resilience of our workforce, by the passion that our care team members brought to the challenge. I can say that we had people signing up to provide vaccinations, signing up to pick up shifts in our hospital inpatient units, even when they had been working to the point of exhaustion, when they had been really making significant contributions, from day to day. I will say more about, how this challenge made me rethink about the pipeline for workforce expectations, and how we can really motivate and also recruit and retain the talent that we need to continue to provide high quality care at MaineHealth and at other organizations that provide healthcare services within Maine. But I also want to acknowledge that my participation in the Outward Bound program had some valuable lessons that I continue to apply to my work to this day.
Thank you, Omar. Those are two terrific stories, and Alan's got to be shaking in his shoes now, waiting for his introduction, I'm sure. Couple things that I'm hearing from the two of you, Jaime and Omar. I heard Jaime talking about this high-performing family that was created in the moment when she became vulnerable herself, but also expressed her compassion and concern for the team, and this sense of community that you identified also, Omar, that was so important. So, Alan, I'm going to give you an opportunity to introduce yourself. Alan and I met, I guess about 4 years ago via Zoom call, and it was unexpected. On the other end of the Zoom call for me was this gentleman who said, I am an alumnus of the Hurricane Island Outward Bound School. I sailed with you on a 14-day expedition in 1989, and it continues to this day to influence my leadership practices. And in any event, without further ado, Alan Cintron Salix. Alan, if you could introduce yourself. This group would love to hear about you and love to hear about Med Centro, and of course, any instance of challenge you'd like to share with us.
Sure. Hi, Jaime, Omar, Judiann, and Andrew. Certainly, the Outward Bound experience of 1989 still lives with me throughout all these years. I'm a healthcare administrator. I was formed in the fields of, in the academic fields of finance, accounting, and management. And my first job was with an investment company in the north part of Puerto Rico. So where I worked for like 3.5 years. Right after that, I made a huge change and came to work in a nonprofit organization. And it was funny because in for-profit organizations, you maximize your income, reduce your expenses, you work differently. Whereas in a nonprofit organization, you have to consume all your budget, and it's a different approach. So I had to make a huge change from my academic learning, from my 3.5 years experience into working with this nonprofit organization back at home in the southern part of the island. I was working with a nun, her name was Sister Isolina Ferrer, and she was a missionary servant of the Most Blessed Trinity with the Mother House in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. So it was like, I think I was very privileged to work for like near 20 something years with her, because I was able to add the human part of the equation to the academic field of finance and accounting, which could be pretty cold if you live just on that. Just look at Wall Street, the profile of people who live in Wall Street. So for so many years, I started changing. I started doing economic development for underdeveloped communities. And there I was able to learn so many important things in life. And you just mentioned a couple of them. Compassion and passion. Those are two very, very important. I think it was Omar and Jaime that mentioned them. And those are two very important words in the life of anyone. So after working for so many years doing economic development for communities from the nonprofit organization perspective, then I came to work into the healthcare field, which I was also prepared as a healthcare administrator. So in Puerto Rico, you have to be board certified to be healthcare administrator. So when I landed here, all those skills from the financial experience and the nonprofit organic experience flourished into an organization that had many financial problems. Death was up here, long-term death. Incomes were down here. It was quite complicated, very complicated. In fact, after 3 days working here, I asked myself, what am I doing here? And then I used a theory, which happens to found a book that clearly described it. Do one thing at a time. Don't try to accomplish everything. But if you do one thing at a time and you finish that thing, then you add another thing. By the end of X amount of time, you would have accomplished many things, and it could turn into a huge thing. And the other thing that I learned into getting into this field is that it's not I, it's we. No one could do everything. And that experience is pretty much embedded into the Outward Bound experience. You can't manage a 30-foot long boat on your own. And I'm going to enter into that later on. So by doing that, this organization came and moved forth with all these people. And another thing I'd like to add is that the most important part is not the administrative job itself, but it's the change in culture. How you change the culture, the attitude of people into doing things. So it took like 5 or 6 years. Cultural changes are slow. You can't change the culture by giving them a training and going, okay, we train on this and we're going to move this in this direction. They have to really put it inside them, put it embedded in their everyday doing. So we moved forth into that direction. They started moving leader by leader into that direction. Today, Centro is called by the feds. By the way, we are a federally qualified healthcare center, 501c3 compliant. And we've been in business for 53 years now. We were founded in 1971. So we started moving forward, and then the feds didn't like us when I landed here. They were about to close the place, quite frankly, and they put us in conditions. Audits were not all that good. A lot of findings. Now we have pristine audits, year after year after year after year, and they call us the gold standard across all Puerto Rico. There are like 22 federally qualified health centers in Puerto Rico. There's 1,400 across the nation, and we're ranked near number 30 across the whole nation by HRSA, Health Resources Service Administration, which is a brand of the U.S. Department of Healthcare. But the important thing is in here is that we changed the culture of the people. And one of the things that happened to me in my previous job was that Sister Rosalina asked me if I wanted to join the Hurricane Island Outward Bound, which at that time was, I said, well, that's great. I'm going for camping for 14 days. And quite frankly, it was not a camping experience. It was not a survival, 100% survival, but it was probably a very significant experience in my life, which later I was able to use, probably not when I was at my previous job, but in this job. And bringing that in fast track, back in 2017, Puerto Rico was struck by probably the worst hurricane ever in Puerto Rican history, which was Hurricane Maria. It was devastating. You had 3.2 million people without energy for over a month, under the most worst conditions you could think of. Nature was like if a giant came all over the island and started walking over everything. Everything was in very, very, very bad shape. It was then when I realized that the outward bound experience was probably the most important thing I had in hand. You don't have computers, you don't have food scarce, water scarce. Then you start using, your skills of living with what you have, with whatever you have, and understanding that all those on your side needed to have a leader who could lead them, but at the same time, you needed them to accomplish whatever you need to accomplish. And one of our goals was not to close our healthcare center in any time. We were the front line, and it happened. It probably was a success story. In fact, we were probably the only organization in the whole island who had energy, because previously we had provided for that. And we have 3 power plants with 1 mega generation each. And hospitals in the area started laughing, what are these guys putting so much power in? Well, they realized what it was for when we have a hurricane. And the reason I bring this is because when you have an expedition in the outward bound, you have the provisions, everything you need for that trip you're going to make. And probably many healthcare organizations are on a day-to-day basis, but they don't provide for those things they need, they would need along the whole trip. So the 3 aims of the expeditions in the outward bound school, leadership, teamwork, and culture are probably, the 3 things I use the most there in these situations. And it was not just a hurricane, which took like 2 years to overcome them, but then we had the earthquakes, which devastated the southern part of Puerto Rico. All buildings came down. And on top of the earthquakes, then we had the pandemic. So these were very, very hard times. We were able to smoothly come by. Then I realized that my experience was not enough, that experience needed to be shared. And that's how we came out. I gave the call to Andrew and said, Andrew, we need to train our people. We need people to live, to learn to live on their own, on a different experience. And one of the things we talked, Andrew, was that we wanted to change the whole environment, everything. From living in the tropic to living in the northern shores. The language mattered. Everyone in Puerto Rico speaks English. We just don't use it often, but we know the language. So they needed to have the language. They would be living in a boat, in a 30-foot long boat. 13 people, 11 of our crew and 2 instructors. And in the beginning, they had the same feeling I had. Oh, we're going for camping. At the end, it was a completely different experience. And actually, this year we are be having 11 more, and next year we will be having 11 more. And we want you to have a good crew of people who are capable of learning the experience and putting it to work. So,
Hey, Alan. Alan, I want to interrupt for a moment because I want to
Yeah,
come
yeah.
back to you on some of this to go into a bit more detail later, if you would. So
Sure.
I'll be coming back to you in a short time to talk more about the work that the emergency clinical response team is doing and what you've seen in that team's development, say over the last 8 or 10 months since the experience they had together last year. So we'll keep a little in the can here to excite people for later. I have a question, Jaime, I wanted to come back to you on. Last week, we spoke a bit in preparation for this, and you said something that resonated with me, which was that we're in this period with a lot of headwinds in the face of healthcare workers, whether they're clinicians or in administrative roles, and that this is a moment where organizations really need to be wrapping their arms around employees with support and with care. And I'm curious to know, you shared a very personal example of how you've done that with your team, but organizationally, how do you create those conditions, or what would that look like inside an organization like Northern Light or any other? And by the way, I think this is just as relevant to somebody who's in finance or any other career.
Yeah, of course. And I want to make a quick comment about something Alan said about living with what you have. I think sometimes in my industry, it's easy to look back at the easier days, but that we need to live in the now and work with what we have and work toward the future. So I just that comment from Alan really resonated with me. So I know this is only a 90-minute webinar, so I won't tell you all the headwinds because that would take up a whole lot of time. It's a very challenging time to be in healthcare. I will just hit on some of the high points. I mean, clearly we have workforce shortage issues. We have volatility in supply chain. Payer mix is all over the place and shifting. There's a lot of scrutiny on our core business functions. And then, on top of that, and I said last week, it's kind of like being kicked while you're already down. We really are getting a lot of increased scrutiny, from regulators and policymakers, and some of our aspects of healthcare, such as, 340B, or, the fiduciary responsibility that employers have when they're managing health plans or retirement plans and all of that. So, with all of these, immediate pressures and the uncertainty of what's next or how things are going to unfold, even the most well-equipped leader, it's easy to feel, fragile or apprehensive, and that can have a trickle down to teammates or team members. And, you can say, oh, here comes the HR person, she's going to talk about caring, but I am. Caring for your people is just that. It's free. That's the number one support that you can give your people, is caring about them. Our CEO, Tim Dentry, models that to the nth degree. When we have our town halls, he shows vulnerability. Some of my favorite kind of attributes that I would say, when you're trying to support your people, you want to model humanity and vulnerability. You want to be transparent. You want to be honest. You want to involve all of your people when you can, with decision making and planning. We need to remind our people what is available for resources and give them time to use them. You all have some sort of structure in your benefit plans. I guarantee you have an employee assistance program that at least has some telephonic visits. It probably isn't of high cost to your organization. Maybe you even have a program that has face-to-face visits, but people get busy, they forget what they have and what they have access to. So we want to consistently put messaging out in front, reminding of all the things we've already built to support them, and remind where we're adding on. And so, in that regard, it shows that you're reacting to the times. One of the things that we did as the pandemic unfolded and we knew we had to address behavioral health was we increased our amounts of EAP visits, and we changed the structure of our health plan to make behavioral health office visits at no cost to our employees. And those are some things that might cost a little bit of money, but there's still other things that you can do that are lesser of a cost. So being flexible is a big one. So if you can flex time and make it work with people's schedules, I would really, really, really recommend that you start looking proactively at strategies to be able to flex your workforce if you aren't already doing so. It can be hard to figure that out, but once you've got that magic recipe and you can give, you know, leaders on different teams, you know, the autonomy to figure that out amongst their team. There's nothing better, you know, on my team, if someone has a really heavy week, you know, we have a Friday early release sometimes. So it will, you know, 1 or 2 team members, they get to head out early. I mean, that doesn't cost the company money. There's a lot of goodwill when it comes to soccer games and chorus programs and, you know, a concert or you know, a band event. When you can allow your folks the flexibility to start early and end early to be able to attend those sort of things, or flex with their other colleagues. If you're in a clinical setting, it's not always as easy as when you're in an administrative situation, but you certainly can work within your team to help promote that flexibility. I think another really important thing, you know, healthcare is mission driven, and I know not everyone here is represented from healthcare, but some people could really burn themselves down to the ground working hard. And Omar had mentioned, you know, the resilience is amazing, but at the same time, people do get really, really burnt out. I highly recommend for your overachievers and those really, you know, those folks that are always working so hard for you, to remind them, you know, everyone wants an A+. You know, sometimes a B is okay. I say that to my team quite a bit because we tend to strive for perfection, and in this environment, it's not possible most of the time. And so just to reframe that, we need to do the best with what we have. And coming back to that, keeping things simple. You know, sometimes I think we can over plan to try to help our employees. Within my particular division, we moved away from these more intense quarterly meetings with trainings and that sort of thing to a very simple 30-minute touch point every 2 weeks. It could be 15 minutes, it could be 30. We take time for what we call planned fun, and we do this a lot more in our organization now. But you know, if you're busy, you're stressed, you take 15 minutes to play virtual Pictionary with your team, you will not think it is a waste of anybody's time. Everyone leaves that feeling refreshed and feeling like, okay, work isn't such a slog all the time. So those are some, you know, very quick hits. And I believe later on, we'll talk a little bit more about culture. So I'll save some comments on that for that portion. But those would be my comments regarding that question, Andrew.
Jaime, again, terrific answer. I love your comment about Northern Lights CEO being a person willing to model that vulnerability, that honesty, that humanity, to demonstrate that it's okay to come as a person and not just a worker, and say, I need some help here, or I need a little relief, or there's something important going on in my life. And the idea that you're, you know, so consciously looking for those opportunities to give people that way to adapt or adjust their work lives, or just share where they're at. That's meaningful to me. Omar or Alan, if you heard something you're dying to follow up on, you're more than welcome to leap in and interrupt at any time. Otherwise, I'm going to pivot to you, Omar, with a follow-up question. Am I getting in your way of something you wanted to say in response to Jaime?
I just want to acknowledge, I think I agree 100% with everything Jaime has said. I think we need to acknowledge the humanity of our care team members, no matter the resilience that they demonstrate in the face of challenges. And I think Alan hit the nail on the head by acknowledging the central role of culture in shaping the ability of an organization to respond effectively to emerging and unknown threats that will come to light in the days ahead.
That's great.
Also,
Well, Omar,
Jaime's
sorry, Alan, go ahead.
I think that's a key. The fact that I had the opportunity of participating in the Outbound experience in 1989 it's not, it cannot be unique to me. I could model others, and now I have the opportunity of having others, and this should be models to others at this very same time. And if we can promote that in any which way we can, whenever we have an opportunity, then we have a stronger team.
Thank you for that. Alan, I'm sorry, Omar, let me pose a question to you that I think has some relationship here. You mentioned the other day that given all of these headwinds that Jaime alluded to, and I'm sure the many others that I don't really have line of sight to, you said that it's important for organizations to be that there's a growing need for you to be recruiting people and or retaining people who have the ability to adapt to changing situations. And so I'm curious if you can talk a bit about examples of what adaptability means, and also ways in which that quality can either be identified in people or developed in people.
Yeah, we all come from different backgrounds. Even in our own hometown, we have different cultures, some subcultures, and subcultures. If we can have those cultures, without changing your personality, being able to work on the same thing with the same passion and compassion, and aim to the same goals, then we have a huge cultural exchange going on. I think the very good example of that is when you have like we did last year, physicians, psychologists, nurses, social workers jump into a boat and live there for 14 days.
This boat, by the way, Alan.
Yeah. So, I told them, well, first day it's gonna be fun, we're going rowing. Second day is gonna be fun. Third day you're gonna be a little bit tired. By the fourth day, you will not like the guys sleeping by you who snores at night. And then you start to negotiate, and he would probably be doing things differently. And fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh day, you will probably get angry at someone, but by the end of it, you all would have had to negotiate and come into a common culture. And quite frankly, I observed that in the group. As this time I was observer, I was able to see they came in singing the anthem of Puerto Rico all together, as one voice. And I couldn't think of higher cultural integration. And this is a cultural integration in its finest sense. I'm not talking about Chinese and Africans and South American. I'm talking about, the way we think. That's what I call cultural exchange. And instead of having in many organizations, you lose a lot of time, you waste a lot of time into getting everybody, thinking in the very same way for the better of the group. So that's what I really aim to see, happening in every expedition.
Thank you, Alan. Hey, Omar, I'd invite any, comments you might have on that subject as well.
Thank you, Andrew. Alan, that was a great response. I would just add that from a practical standpoint, when we're looking at the applicants for a vacancy on our team or going through the interview and selection process, we ask some of the questions that I think you have posed to us in this panel today. We ask about challenges that have shaped people's view on their profession, on the kind of work that they're engaged in. We look for people who are driven by, as Alan said, both passion for doing something, making a contribution to their community, and compassion, people who feel empathy. During the interview process, I would ask someone to describe, like you did with us, a formative experience and what lessons they drew from that. I also proactively look for people who have the habit of looking for problems in and around them, identifying those issues, and then working collaboratively to address and to solve those problems. And I'll share a secret that those are the people that I try to advance in our organization as well. People who have the insight to identify the underlying drivers for a problem, and then to work cohesively. And that's the question we have in the Q&A, people who have demonstrated in the course of their employment with MaineHealth that they were able to seek out solutions, and more importantly, partner with their colleagues within their own team or department, but also across other departments. Or in the case of MaineHealth, that they were able to look beyond the four walls of their hospital. They were able to partner with their colleagues from another sister institution within MaineHealth and help us to implement a solution at scale. To me, that's the biggest predictor of success for someone who wants to rise through the ranks in our organization. And I look for that kind of experience in people's prior roles as well. If I see a resume that is rich with experiences where people were able to identify issues and help to solve them, and I look for humility. I look for an acknowledgement that they were not the one solving the problem, but they were supporting the team that helped to solve the problem. Now, this may differ from the conventional wisdom that some people might impart to young people who are populating their resume. I would say it's a good thing to be humble in your resume and not to state everything as if you solely were responsible for the accomplishments you are listing on your resume. For an organization as large and complex as ours, we know that no one individual can carry a project or initiative to success on their own. It's their ability to work collaboratively, optimistically, and positively with others across the organization that is the biggest predictor of success.
Let me add something to Omar. When you're in the middle of the ocean and you have a boat full with 13 people, if the boat sinks, it's not the leader that sinks, it's the whole team. And I mean, that's why the outbound experience is so important, because we can say that we're so used to have the theory, being very academic, but when you live the experience, you realize that that could happen. In fact, there's a book, I have it here with me, which I use, because it's many times those of us who get to lead forget about the we, and we more and more use the I. And this book it really helped me. It's called We. I don't know if it's any longer available, but this theory, I used it in this organization and it worked. And I had to teach myself that it's we. I depend on everybody. If I'm successful, they will be successful. If they're successful, I will be successful. So I think what Omar said is exactly that point. And by bringing people to having, the real feeling, not just sitting in a desk and sitting in a screen, but living it, that if it doesn't go well in both, it's not going to go well for anyone. So I just wanted to add that.
We sometimes here at Outward Bound talk to partners about sort of our view on the formation of culture or team dynamics, and really draw a line backwards to individual behaviors, that in individuals' behaviors and responses and methods of communication, interacting with other members on their team and their different styles of interacting and communicating and problem solving and so forth, though the chemistry of those multiple interactions sort of creates your unique team dynamic, but then it's the multiple team dynamics within the organization also coming in contact with one another that kind of accumulate into an organizational culture. So thank you all for your thoughts on these topics. Judiann, I know that you had a question you wanted to ask the panel, so let me invite you back into the conversation for a moment and let you have at that.
Great, thanks, Andrew. Really appreciate all your remarks, and especially the remarks around humility, and especially humility when leading a team and how important that trait is. I was thinking a lot about all of the challenges in healthcare and hearing from so many of our participants in our courses about what they're going through these days in their day-to-day work. And so many of them are really struggling to find and remind themselves of their personal why. And I wonder what you do specifically for your teams to help remind them of their personal why they got into the field they're in of healthcare, and how to stay not just resilient. Resilient is a great word, but I do think it's a bit overused these days, but how to find that why again, and just re-motivate themselves, re-engage in a way that gets them excited for the care they're delivering, or for whatever role they have. If you're an accountant, you're still doing something to support the delivery of care. If you're in IT, you're still doing something. So how do you help remind them of their personal why?
Jaime, I see you having a reaction there. You want to chime in on that?
Sure. It's a really, really good question. And I think it's really easy to lose track of that in what I'll just call all the noise. I personally, I start with reminding what my people give to the big picture. So, right, we're the behind the scenes people, right? We never see a patient, but when we support the clinician that then sees the patient that has the good outcome, in the end, this little operations and rewards team that is the underbelly of, your employment experience, we are impacting our communities. And so we start almost all of our meetings with that. We all play a role in the health of our communities and the health of Maine. And when we take it out to that level, people then tend to look within and here, I'm doing this, and this is where I play my role to get all the way down there. And then they tend to get more juiced up about what they're doing in the day-to-day. We also talk a lot about service heart and service culture. We are all people that love to support people. And when we kick off a meeting, or we have a reminder about our service heart, which is what we talk about in our service center, because we serve 11,000 employees. Again, that gets back to people's why. We care about people. So for my team, we like to look at the bigger picture and then drill back to how we are a big part of that. And I think that helps people be grounded and back into why they got into this role in the first place. That would be my feedback on that one.
Awesome.
I like to add that those of us who lead organizations, we are selling challenges. We're marketing challenges all the time. And we have to challenge our people. And if people get used to be challenged, then we will have a stronger team, because they will be requesting the next challenge and the next challenge. And that's, sometimes it might be called motivation, but I rather call it challenge. And get people to get used to have those challenges. For instance, one of the things I tell my colleagues is, okay, bring me problems and bring me solutions. And then I challenge them. I usually ask them, do you think I'm smarter than you are? Or do you think you're smarter than I am? We both could come out with the best ideas. Probably you could come up with a better idea because you're in the field, you're bringing a problem specific to your field. You might have some solutions, but you have to go back and find these solutions. I can help you choose which is the better or the solutions we can work with, but probably you can bring the best solution. And then by that, doing those kind of things, you're challenging them all the time and all the time. Next time they come to the office, they say, oh, I have to go to Alan's office there. So I better come up with a solution, to the problem. And he will help me choose which is the better one. So challenging is probably a good answer and getting people to get used to be challenged.
Judiann, I might add a couple of thoughts to what's already been said, which I agree with. I will highlight that clarity of purpose and just restating that again and again is really helpful. So, our vision at MaineHealth is to work together so our communities are the healthiest in America. And I think we have said that enough in our leadership meetings. We have a terrific humanitarian CEO who makes it a point to repeat this frequently enough where I think most people can recite it just like I did. I will offer that also having clarity at the department level. So in our department, like Jaime, we are a support team. We are a support service within our organization. So our purpose is to work with care teams so that every patient receives evidence-based care in a patient-centered way with minimal risk of harm. And what we have, within our team, we have this filtered down to just 4 words: optimal care and zero harm. So we literally have a motto for our department. So that's one thing, having clarity of purpose. But I would say the other concept I would bring to this is the power of stories, of telling stories, both of success and failure or near failure, when something almost went horribly wrong, which somebody was able to, or many people were able to intervene and prevent from getting worse. Those stories are powerful. They are, as I think most of us in this webinar would know, stories are the way people learn and remember things, especially at my age. So I think that making stories a part of the way that people talk about what happened in their organization or the results of all the hard work that a team has brought to a challenge, I find that, very powerful. We have a spectrum of personalities on any team. Some people are introverted, others like to express themselves more. So I would leave it for people to just, in their own mind, in their own heart, be aware of why they bring their best to the work that they do every day. It's not so much about stating it explicitly, but reminding yourself as to why all the effort is worth it. Stories help with that.
Omar, your story comment makes me think of a quote that I like to think about in respect to our programs. The category that Outward Bound exists in is often called experiential learning. And so this is a little bit flying in the face of that. But the quote is from a gentleman named John Dewey, an educator, who said, "People don't learn by experience." Pause there for a second for dramatic effect. He says, "People don't learn from experience. They learn by reflecting on experience." There's a little aha in that for me, and I think it connects to your story bit. The opportunity to look back and reflect and be able to retell that, whether that's retelling it for yourself or retelling it for others. You also talked about failure. So I want to open this concept up to the whole panel about what does a successful failure look like?
I work in
All right.
patient safety. Alan, go ahead, please.
No, go ahead, Omar.
I was going to mention that, I work in patient safety, so I have the privilege of having a front seat view to when things don't work out so well. So I just want to acknowledge that we find more often than not that it is a unique combination of circumstances that leads to something failing or breaking down, or in our universe, an error taking place. And visuals or images are almost as powerful as stories. So there's imagery in patient safety of a Swiss cheese model for, human error. So I would say we approach failures in systems and processes as from a patient safety standpoint, as an unusual alignment of all the holes in the Swiss cheese that culminated in an error ultimately being able to reach a patient. To me, in my universe, that equates with some sort of a failure. But it's not the in I would say 9 cases out of 10, it's not the fault of an individual, so to speak. Although rarely we have to apply what we call just culture principles to delineate whether somebody may have behaved in a reckless manner or not. But more often than not, like I said, maybe 8 or 9 times out of 10, it's this unique combination of circumstances. So I would offer that stories can be very nuanced and multi-layered, and it's worth the investment in time to peel back the layers and try to understand the underlying issues on a systems level that contributed to a failure. So that's kind of the approach that I grew up with in the world of patient safety. I'm sure there's a whole lot more to it. And clearly, culture has ultimately, I can tell you, it's all going to go back to what Ellen, and that's why he wears the, CEO hat in his organization. It all goes back to culture. People have to be comfortable talking about when things didn't work out, failures, and learning from them in a non-judgmental way. But you can't do that if you don't have that culture of learning.
Yeah, I wanted to add that failure is never the end of the road. Failure is embedded in everybody's life. I don't know anyone who has never had a failure. Experiments, new drugs, they're full of failures in the experiments until they finally get, the final drug that would make it. So we need to see failure as part of our learning process, and that we need to have others, see failures as part of that learning process. The expedition last year, they had a major failure when their boat, broke the keel, or something happened, they couldn't go on, and they knew they had to fix it, and they fixed it. So it's just how you manage failure. Of course, there are some catastrophic failures and things like that. Well, it happened. You know what? World War II, the airplane that won the World War II was the B-17, and it was a failure in their first, there's a book called the Checklist Manifesto, and they did the testing of that airplane together with, I think it was Lockheed, the other one, and it crashed in after the first trial, before, when they were doing the demonstration to all the militaries. But then they find out it was a great airplane. It had a greater range. It could carry more load. It could fly higher. Why did that airplane fly? And it was a human error. And the human error was that this was a 4-engine airplane, and it was so complicated to fly that they needed to develop a checklist in their initial takeoff, because otherwise they would forget about something and it could fail. After they discovered that, they ordered, like, I think it was 13,000 airplanes, and it was the one who bombed, all the Nazi Germany, and finally won the war in the European field. So if they didn't learn from that failure, probably we could have a different kind of work today. So failure is part of the process.
Hearing the two of you, Alan and Omar, talk about that causes me to think of a professor at Harvard Business School who I've enjoyed reading before. Her name's Amy Edmondson, and Amy has done a ton of research about what differentiates super successful teams from successful teams. And the quality that she has identified as being the linchpin is this notion of psychological safety within a team. And by psychological safety, what she would say is that on a team where it is okay to say, I don't understand, I need to hear that again, or I disagree and I have a totally different point of view, and I know we've been doing it this way for 10 years, but perhaps there's a better way we should consider, or I think we're about to make a mistake. Simply being able to raise your hand or open your mouth and articulate those things without fear that there'll be reciprocity from somebody who might be a couple of clicks ahead of you in the org chart, or somebody who's been with the organization longer, that brings voice and that brings ideation from the whole team instead of just a point of authority. And so looking at these moments of failure, first of all, making failure okay. Obviously, you're not looking for poor patient outcomes, but looking back at these moments and looking for the opportunities for change and improvement just seems so important. Jaime, I may have jumped in there if you had something that you were hoping to add to that. Otherwise,
Well, actually, your comment improves what I was about ready to say. And, it's hard for me to not, be like, woohoo, because what you just said is everything to me. So, we call it high trust environment on our team, psychological safety. They're the same thing. But, when I think back to my experience with Outward Bound, you never know when someone will seize the opportunity to shine. And when you have a high trust team or high trust environment, that feeling of psychological safety, people, they have an opportunity to shine because they feel like they can take risks. They feel like they can give it their shot. And then when you have that environment, when things go wrong, people feel supported. And then you huddle up after, what went wrong? What can we learn from it? And if you handle failure in the right way, your team only becomes stronger because of it. So I can't say enough about the psychological safety piece, and I'm so glad that you referenced that, Andrew. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. Hey, I want to remind everybody who's with us today that although apparently the chat feature isn't working as expected, the Q&A function is working. So if there's something that you'd like to offer to the conversation or hear more about, by all means, please use that, and we'd love to hear your thoughts or respond to whatever questions you might have. With that said, I'm going to put Jaime on the spot for a moment here. Sorry, Jaime, and ask you, what's something you'd like to hear a little bit more about from whether it's Omar or Judiann or Alan?
So I really would, I loved one of the things that Alan said about doing one thing at a time. And I also have seen the theme of compassion and passion, which it probably is pretty clear by now. I'm a very passionate person. It's just kind of how I am. Omar, I'm curious, in your, more clinical role, right? You're looking for, the target of 0 errors. It's well, I'll call it surgical, not in a surgical way, but it's very purposeful. How do you put the passion and compassion into that type of role?
Great question. I also want to maybe clarify, we are looking for 0 harm. We know that errors are inevitable and they will happen. And like Ellen was saying, an error is an opportunity to learn, to dig a little bit deeper. I would say, in order to foster a culture of psychological safety, my most useful friend has been silence. If I can say something to myself in my heart and not say it out loud, I see that as a good meeting and a good day. And I hope that, some of my colleagues will agree with me, because that means, I give an opportunity to someone who is closer to where the error may have happened and probably has more insight into the reason things may have gone wrong to speak up, because I didn't fill the space with my voice. it also means that I may have stifled the discussion in the moment. So I would say for a leader in my role where I am in the organization, it's more important to listen and to create the space for people to speak up. When I do speak, I have to be mindful that I may be starving the room of oxygen that perhaps other people could have used to express something that may be more useful to the overall success of the organization that I may have said or I can think of. So I think it's just constantly reminding myself. Coming back to the passion and how do you harness that? I think that the reason that we have this slogan for our team, optimal care, zero harm, it's intended to channel those energies, to channel that passion away from what may be wrong in your immediate vicinity toward how can we all work together to provide the optimal care that our patients need, to achieve the zero harm that our patients need. So I think once again, going back to the theme that I mentioned earlier, having clarity of purpose, using few words and using the right kind of words to channel people's passion and their compassion and energy toward a shared purpose. And then using stories to help foster the culture, because the stories reflect both situations where we created the space for people to learn together, as well as the successes that accrued because of people working collaboratively toward that shared purpose. So I would say for me, it's how effectively can I use these different levers to keep the team engaged? Because more often than not, with people spread out across such a large healthcare system, I don't have the opportunity to speak with them one-on-one, on a regular basis. So I have to choose carefully what the message is that we are getting out there in front of our team and all of our other care team members as it relates to patient safety, to clinical quality of care.
Hey, I want to share a comment, by the way, that just came in from one of our attendees, Daisy, who wrote this. She said, "I never thought that the lessons I learned from my experience with Outward Bound as a high school student would resonate so closely with my professional approach to human resources. 30 plus years later, I still reflect on the Outward Bound approach to overcoming challenges collectively and by finding inner confidence and courage. And it's just incredible to hear other professionals who know exactly what that experience is." She said, "Smelly, uncomfortable, infuriating, and exhilarating." That's the Outward Bound experience, not this panel, by the way. Thanks so much for providing this webinar. I love it. So I just wanted to share that with you all as panelists, that I think people are really appreciative of the perspective you've all been able to offer. There was a question that came in earlier on the chat, and Judiann, thank you for sharing your response with the asker of the question. But for the benefit of folks in the group who haven't heard the question yet, the question was thinking about the quality of cohesion as an organization or as a team. How is that trainable? And if so, how do you train that or develop that quality within a workforce?
And yeah, Andrew, I have a thumb rule theory I often use. We have near 500 employees. We serve a baseline of 50,900 unduplicated patients. That's a huge amount of people, moving all over. 3 to 5% of the population within you, wherever you are going to be against you no matter what. They're antagonists, whatever happens. You can't concentrate your best effort in that population because they're going to be against you anyway, or against anyone, So you have to concentrate on the other 95%. But sometimes, many times, you waste your best efforts on that 3 to 5%. And then that leads you to nowhere, because you will keep on bouncing back. For those, they will follow at the end. They will be against you, but they will follow. And that's one way, you can manage that situation. You don't act against them. You just ignore them to a certain extent and move into the main pattern.
That's really good advice. It makes me think about your one thing at a time motif. I gather on your list of one things will never be, let me try desperately to persuade the 3%ers that we're better than they think, or what have you, but focus on that big giant pool of employees who are on board and they are grabbing an oar and rowing when necessary, and so on. So we're getting dangerously close to the end of our time. I know that we're going to wrap up by 11:30, and we don't want to make anybody late for anything. So I'm curious to know if there's anyone on the panel who has a question they wish they could pose and haven't yet had the opportunity. Well, I guess not. However, I do have another comment that just came in, and I'm going to read it to you live because I haven't even read it yet, but I know the source, and she's very smart. So, Brittany writes, as someone who worked in healthcare for many years and now works in a corporate environment in leadership and organizational development for 6 years now, one thing that I've been faced with since making that transition has been focusing on what's most important, clarity of purpose, if you will, and investing in development, whether it's budgeting intentionally, creating time and prioritizing development, or getting executives to advocate for furthering the education and development of leaders. As an organizational psychologist, I try to remain realistic, but I'm always open to ideas about how to advocate for prioritizing development. Brittany, thanks for that. That's a great addition. So, Alan, as I said, we're getting really close to the end here. I wanted to come back to you for a minute as we start to close out. So you told a little bit about the emergency clinical response team at Med Centro and its origins, the inspiration being the devastation of the hurricanes you experienced in 2017, and saying, if people can't get to our points of care, our caregivers need to get to the people. And you've made, I think, amazing investments, and you and your organization have been quite visionary in that way. Outward Bound aside, by the way, because I don't want to be shamelessly promoting us all the time, but the fact that you're willing to take these professionals out of their day-to-day work environments for what really turns out to be about a 3-week commitment, 14 days of which are up here with Outward Bound, that's quite an amazing investment that you're making in a whole bunch of measures. So I'm curious now if you could just comment. It's been, well, it was last July that your last crew went into their expedition. What are you seeing in those people now, 10 months later?
Yeah, well, let me put this in context. When we had Hurricane Maria, the George Washington University, the Milken Institute from George Washington University issued a study on the deaths related to Hurricane Maria. 2,975 deaths happened because of Hurricane Maria. None of them were trauma, but were afterward. So that's a huge number for 2,975 deaths related to Hurricane Maria. Most of them were chronic conditions that were not properly taken care of, because hospitals are not designed for the primary care. They're acute care in most cases. And you bring the patients into the hospitals when they have complications, or you can take care of their everyday healthcare. But primary and secondary care are the contention wall that prevents, or are designed to prevent, patients from going to acute care in most cases. when this happened in Puerto Rico, our professionals, I observed that they were not sufficiently prepared to leave on basics, going back to basics. Judiann mentioned that in the very beginning. And although we have the equipment and we have everything, they needed to be better prepared. And then, I took the experience I had in the Outward Bound back in 1989. I said, well, this is really what they need in order to survive during a catastrophic event. And by the way, I'm heading north right now. My back is into the south. Just 1 mile from here is where all hurricanes pathway every single year. It's just a matter of fact when is the next one is going to strike us. So if that happens again, we need to have our people better prepared on how to live on basics, on how to live on what you have available. And that's how we landed up in the experience of Hurricane Outward Bound School, which, as mentioned before, it's a total, complete change from language, cultural, environment, everyday living, living very uncomfortable in a small boat. And then they came back at the very end.
Alan, I'm sorry to have to interrupt you, but we're almost right up against our time here. So
Oh yeah, I know that. Well,
I'm sorry for that, because
probably that was the most important part. And now they are empowered and they understand, which is, I think, is much more important, that going back to basics is always there.
That's great. Well, it's 11:29 and a bunch of seconds on my clock right now, and I'm afraid I'm going to be a little bit late here. And by the way, Brittany, who posed the comments about, as an organizational psychologist, looking for ways to persuade executives to make these investments in employee development of the person as well as the worker. I know that she'd love to hear more from you, and if we had more time, I'd ask you that. So with your permission, I might love to be able to put Brittany in touch with some of you if she could pose those questions to you after the fact. Jaime and Omar, any final thoughts as we tie up at the dock and let people disembark?
Thank you for the opportunity. It was a pleasure to participate with Jaime and Alan, and of course, Andrew, spend some time with you again.
Thank you.
This was great. I'm really glad we pulled this together, and appreciate everyone's time this morning.
That's great. Well, thank you to all three of you for volunteering your time. You've got plenty of things to do in busy lives without so generously giving of your time and your thoughts. Judiann, thank you as well for being here. It's been a pleasure to have you contribute. And to everybody who made time this morning, thanks so much. And I hope that you enjoy the rest of your days. Not the rest of your days, plural. I mean, today. I hope you enjoy the rest of today, although I guess all of your days. So
that's right.
All right. Have a good Thursday. How's that? Take care.
Thank you.
Nice to meet you all.